Apologies. I took 2 days off, so we are going to keep catching up as much as I can today. Chapter 3: The Loss of the Mother and the Sense of Self. The biological birth of the human infant and the psychological birth of the individual are not coincident in time. The former is a dramatic, observable, and well circumscribed event, the latter a slowly unfolding intropsychic process. Mahler, Pine, and Bergen. What is it which causes such a devastating wound to the psyches of children separated from their biological mothers? Mahler, Pine, and Bergman, quoted above, subscribe to the idea that the physical birth and psychological birth do not happen simultaneously, and that for several months after physical birth takes place, the infant remains psychologically merged with the mother. The phenomenon of physical birth can be readily observed and documented. The slowly unfolding introspect process of the psychological birth, on the other hand, proceeds largely unnoticed by anyone other than the mother and the child themselves. The infant, as they mature in their first year of life, gradually begins to experience themselves as being separate from their mother, rather than as an extension of her. The mother then becomes a love object for the child, the source of their security and of the satisfaction of their needs. The significance of the process to the child's feeling of well-being should alert us to the havoc which may be wrought should this tie be prematurely severed and the continuum of bonding interrupted. Dual unity with the mother. Eric Newman expresses a similar idea and remains that the human child requires a period of year after birth, which he calls the extrauterine embryonic phase, to attain the degree of maturity that characterizes the young of most other mammals at birth. During this time, though the physical body is already born, the self or core being of the infant is not yet separated from that of the mother, but psychologically is contained within her. The nature of this relationship between mother and child is characterized not by subject and object, but by a kind of fluidity of being, of mother-child world transcending both time and place. The mother provides a container for the child's developing ego, and just as she had previously provided the container for their developing physical body. So basically, as I had mentioned in the 2 previous chapters, there is what we call the 4th trimester, and that is the first 3 months of the baby's year, and they need like this replication of the womb in a physical sense, but it goes deeper than that, because no matter how long us as children are get older, we are still psychologically and connected to our mothers. And we're going to talk more about that, so let's just continue. Both Mailer and Newman describe the relationship as dual unity, to which the mother not only acts as the child's self, but actually is that self, an uninterrupted continuum of being within the matrix of the mother is necessary in order for the infant to experience a rightness or wholeness of self from which to begin their separation or individualization process. The continuity and quality of their primal relationship is crucial because it may set the tone for all subsequent relationships. Alright, so I don't know if you guys understand that, but basically, when it comes to relationships in the future, whether it's a friendship or a partnership, you know, dating, marriage, etc., the tone is set between the mother and the child. And if those things are not working well, specifically with the birth mother, it will show up later on as the child grows. Okay. A break in the continuum of bonding. Relinquishment and adoption is not the only case where the psychological continuum is interrupted. Babies separated during war and other disasters, premature infants who are placed in the incubators, and even babies who are the victims of modern obstetrical practices, aka where mothers are kept in one room of the hospital and the babies in another. I personally had to deal with that, may suffer from this interruption of the continuum of primal relationship to the mother. Being returned to the biological mother may be better for the child than being handed over to someone else, but there still may be a lack of trust in the continuity of the goodness and rightness of their environment and of themselves. One night, metaphorically think of the discontinuity of the mother-child unit as a breaking of a plate. If one breaks a plate, then glues it back together, although there might be a good fit because the same pieces are used, there is now glue separating the two parts. Let us assume that this glue symbolizes a tenuous bond that cannot be trusted as being as strong as the original whole plate. There may always be a feeling that the plate can again be broken, that separation can reoccur. In the case of adoption, not only does that plate have to be glued back together, but the other half of the plate is different, so that the pieces will not quite fit together. There's always a feeling of not fitting. Not only is there a less trust in the strength of the bonding, the glue, but that bonding is made even more tenuous by the poor fit between the two pieces. Some pieces may fit better than others, but only the original is the other half. For the child who has experienced these breaks in continuity of bonding, their trust in their environment has been shaken, and their sense of self has been compromised. Something is broken, something is missing, and it will never be the same. So I want to take a moment to, I'm going to do a video later on in more detail, but there is a reason why open adoptions and letting adoptees know from a very young age that they're adopted, even when they didn't know, there was always this missing of self. There was this feeling of knowing but yet not knowing. Like they couldn't put their finger on it. And then when they did find out, it is a huge identity crisis. And while we are statistically higher for things like we're 15% have a higher chance of murdering people, we are 8 times more likely to unalive ourselves or even turn to drug and alcohol abuse. There is so much that goes on, and while adoption itself is traumatic, we suggest being open and honest, and from a very young age, because it's important that they get to know who they are within that realm. It's a tough road to navigate, but that will always be my suggestion. Alright. Premature ego and development. Premature ego development. In addressing the sense of self, Daniel Stern's ideas differ from those of Mailer and of Newman. Stern does not believe that the infant begins life merged with the mother, but that they are separate and has a sense of this separateness right from the beginning. He maintains that to be merged implies a previous separation, and while semantically Stern may be correct, I agree with Mailer that under ideal conditions, the infant is psychologically still part of the maternal matrix, perhaps not yet emerged rather than merged. She is their whole environment, their whole world. If for some reason the mother cannot be counted on to be the whole environment for the infant, they begin to take over the function from her. Rather than a gradual, well-timed developmental process, the child is forced by this wrenching experience of premature separation to be a separate being, to form a separate ego before they have to. The phenomenon is often referred to as premature ego development and is sometimes considered to be pathological. This is not to say that there might not be some advantages to premature ego development. It may provide survival value. Indeed, because adoptees often find the world hostile, this aspect of premature ego development is often felt as that which saves them from annihilation. Although this survival value aspect of premature ego development may become unnecessary when the child is placed with the adoptive parents, they do not perceive this. Their experience is that the protector may at any time disappear. Rather than trusting the permanence of the caregiver, many adoptees never feel as if they can count on anyone, and they have to be self-sufficient in life. Wow, that hit home. Yeah, we are always in survival mode, and we have, I'm gonna just say it out loud, I know so many of us have major control issues and trust issues because of it, even though we were separated at birth. It's a big thing. It's very big. Anyway, moving on. Their feelings about this go as far back as they can remember, and probably further. Paula, in trying to put words to those feelings, said, "It was as if I figuratively sat up in my crib and said to myself, I cannot trust anyone. I will have to take care of myself." The danger, as our considerations are concerned, is that we may too readily accept this premature ego development as proof that the child is adjusting well to their environment. Although in a sense this is true, we have to keep in mind that in having been separated from their mother, the child has found the environment to be hostile. They should not have had to make this adjustment at such a young age, but should have been allowed to bask for a while longer in paradise. Whereas labeling premature ego development as pathological may be extreme, we should not ignore the importance of timing and sequence in the developmental processes. For this reason, I believe that an accelerated maturation process is inappropriate at this particular age of development, with consequences which I shall enumerate later. There are other reasons to support the concept that a child's developing a sense of self is more gradual than Stern would have us believe, and that the dual unity with the mother might be more natural. On the desired state, one reason comes from my own experience as a mother, having having given birth as well as having adopted. I know that there are many things which happen between mother and infant, which are intuitive and unobservable, yet real and significant. to the mother-child bond and the communications between them. It is the kind of unconscious, instinctive relationship which Newman has called the participant mystique. During this beginning phase in the baby's life, when a nonverbal, intuitive, and unconscious communication takes place between mother and child, is it not possible that the biological mother may be irreplaceable for anyone else? She may be, as Winnicott and others have described, uniquely prepared for this role. The second reason for my believing in this early dual unity between mother and child comes from the testimony of adoptees. They tell me that they feel as if part of themselves or their selves is missing, a phenomenon they sometimes describe as phantom birth pain, a sense of something missing. Oh, yeah, I've had that my entire life. I will tell you guys, there are so many things that I've always felt something is missing, that there's a loss, and you can't always put your finger on it. And sometimes it bothers you more than other times, but that feeling does not go away. And I do find that adoptees tend to be more intuitive in those senses, and tends to trust their gut more often. Okay, sorry. Moving on. So long as a child's ego remains embedded within the matrix of their mother, they are free of the threat of loss of self. However, if a child is separated from her before gaining a sense of self separated from her, they may feel incomplete. The ideal state of the self. It is, if indeed Stern is right, that all infants have a separate sense of self right from birth, perhaps it is the ideal state of the self, which is injured in the separation from the mother. What is this ideal state of self, and how might it relate to the way in which a relinquished child responds to the world? It is thought by many psychologists that this ideal state is a feeling of rightness, well-being, and wholeness, which reflects a harmonious atmosphere of safety and security from which a child can develop a strong sense of self-esteem. It is a state of primary narcissism considered appropriate to the stage of life. The opposites of the state are the feelings of anxiety, sorrow, and loneliness. One source of those feelings is the separation of an infant from the mother. There are the feelings most often described by the adoptees who have at least ceased to deny or repress their feelings. Once these feelings surface, there is often an accompanying urge to search for the birth mother as a source of relief from that pain. This is a yearning to return to that state of well-being, which lies embedded in the emotional, cellular, and perhaps spiritual memory of adoptees. The tie to the mother and the apparent need to reconnect with her, then, is not only a longing to find the lost object, but a longing to find the lost self. I will say that is so true. So true. We often want to have answers to our questions, and even then it's another side, but we go through the search, and that's hard. Um it's a really hard time, but just to give a warning on that, even when we find our birth parent or our birth mother specifically, and we get the answers we needed, not everything is going to be rainbows. Not everything is going to be returning to, like, I feel good, or like no abandonment issues. No, that very much still exists. Um, Again, I will go into more detail on that, but I just wanted to give that little warning, especially from my own personal experience. Alright, the search for the self. The search for self is a mission for many adoptees who believe that their baby soul was annihilated upon the separation from the original mother. The search for self therefore seems to be intimately connected to the search for the birth mother. Trying to find my mother is connected to trying to find my sense of self, is how Erica put it. Paul described it this way: I feel as if I never know who I am until I find my birth mother. It isn't just a genetic thing, it is who I am. More like the soul, my real self, Janet said. It has something to do with finding out about myself, and it has something to do with having to explain to myself what happened. I want to know why, Gerald said. Even though I was an adult before I found out that I was adopted, I have always felt incomplete, as if something got lost between the hospital and home, or maybe even before that. I don't know if finding my real mother will make me more complete, but I have to try it. I have to do something. The false self. The false self. Perhaps the strength of this primal relationship has been underestimated because of the apparent adjustment many children make to the new environment. As adults, we believe that we want to what we want to believe, and we want to believe that a child who is not causing any trouble is well adjusted. It is important that the parents not be lulled into believing that this child suffers no pain, that my child is not having those problems. Adjustment often means shutting down, creating a false self. What is the false self and how does it manifest? Many adoptees I've treated, most of whom did not act out in childhood, speak of having a sense that the baby they were died, and that the one they decided to become was going to have to be different, to be better, so that he would not once again be abandoned. They became people pleasers, constantly seeking approval. Oh boy, that hits home. Sorry, I'm like on the verge of not crying reading this because that really, really hits home. As children, they were very cooperative, polite, charming, and generally good. But locked inside them is pain, and the fear and the unacceptable baby who died, who will come back to life if they are not vigilant. They can never truly bond with anyone because they are not being themselves. They relate an inability to show how they feel about things, especially the so-called negative feelings of anger, hostility, disappointment, or sorrow. With a compliant adoptee, the problem is that of what isn't happening rather than what is. The tendency toward a false self is important to recognize as a defense coping mechanism and deserves further investigation because it is often seen as a good adjustment and the child being given no opportunities to truly be themselves. Even with all this energy consuming work of creating a good false self, most adoptees perceive themselves to be only less than ideal, but defective or bad. Beth, who is in fact charming, beautiful, and very talented, describes herself as a rotten, crummy, unworthy person. I felt that one. Although most adoptees are not so vehement in their denunciations of themselves, they nevertheless often voice apprehension about, about allowing anyone to see the real person beneath the mask. That is so true. Like, I'm going to be honest. I feel like I often put up a front because I worry about what people think and see me as. And because I've been opening up on my own personal story and adoption and being upfront, I'm just going to say I'm not a perfect person, but there's a lot of this that cuts really, really deep. Um, and so I'm being raw with you all, whether it's here or on TikTok. Like, I'm being raw. And I appreciate those that are listening, um, and the kindness, the true kindness from you all, whether you're an adoptee, a first parent, an adoptive parent, or not even within this triad, because we need that understanding. Okay, sorry. I needed to insert myself into that situation. All right. As Patty put it, I don't want people to know how insecure I feel. Not letting people know keeps me more in control. Jed said that he was always secretive about his feelings, believing them to be dangerous. Janice, who says that it was much easier for her to address huge crowds of people in an impersonal manner than to have a one-on-one, in-depth conversation with someone, knows that people see her as competent, worthwhile person. She doesn't feel that inside, however. She feels very insecure and distrusts others' motives. Victoria uses her false sense to protect herself. She said, I'm not always sure against what except rejection. Danielle said, if people don't know how insecure I feel, then they couldn't get a reaction from me. Richard offered that some of the false self is necessary. Some of that discipline, it has to be to others. He knows that that he seems in charge of himself, but inside he feels a wreck. Virginia gave a similar example. Many people see her as dynamic, dramatic, and extroverted, yet she feels small and lonely inside. Sometimes she is afraid that others can see what is really going on inside. She believes that she is changing, however, that healing is taking place. She said, it seems that I've always been who I am, but I am starting to be who I am. I've changed a lot in the last 7 years, but I don't think I've really changed. I've become more myself. A changing is a becoming. While it is true that most people have a social persona which they show to the world, it seems that the false self of the adoptee is more exaggerated. There is more of a feeling of discrepancy between the inside self and the outside self. Perhaps an observation from my daughter when she was 14 years old encapsulates the general feeling. If someone rejects the outside of you, that's not so bad because it isn't really you. But if you really let someone know who you really are inside and they reject you, that's really a rejection. The false self is the adoptee's method of adjusting to their environment in order to protect themselves from further abandonment and rejection. Rejection and the basic trust. Yet even the false self cannot ward off the feeling of rejection and loss of basic trust which ensues. The sense of rejection caused by the original separation may have untold effects on the ego development of the child, as has previously been suggested. Florence Clothier suggests that besides the usual demands made upon the ego, the abandoned child must also compensate for the wound left by the loss of the biological mother. He is denied they are denied the primal relationships, the continuity of nurturing and security experienced in utero, as they mask their entrance into the new and alien world outside of the womb. The feeling that life is unsafe, that they must be on guard, takes a toll, part of which might be sacrificed in ego development, in a sense of spontaneity and carefree abandon, which may be associated with the early trauma of the disappearance of the mother. The loss of the mother disallows the achievement of basic trust, the first milestone in the healthy development of a human being. The ability to be spontaneous, to enjoy life, is rooted in trust that the mother will be there to keep the child safe. Impulsivity, common among adopted children, should not be mistaken for spontaneity. Part of my belief that the loss of basic trust and subsequent behaviors are a result of prolonged separation from the mother is based on studies of children placed in incubators at birth. One such study by Ronaldo Maduro is a case in point. Maduro studied an identical twin who had been in an incubator for several weeks following her premature birth, and who thus felt abandoned by her mother. Although she was eventually reunited with her mother, she had lost her sense of basic trust, not only in the reliability of the mother to be there, but in her own basic goodness. Many of the coping mechanisms of what Maduro called her baby mind were identical to what many adoptees have told me they experience. He described it this way. Her baby mind, would react with bodily feelings to mental pain. It would substitute things for people, especially when they offered comfort, safety, and reliability. It would not depend on anyone else in a close way because the feeder could go away or change suddenly. This includes the perfectionist need to do everything there by herself without help from others. It would feel narcissistic depletion, emptiness inside with intense longing. This state leads to severe distress and to harmful interference with a basic loving investment of one's own body image and the development of object relations. It would feel in touch always with a conscious deep sadness, but not necessarily depression, since in infancy the opportunity to consolidate the mother's imago experience did not occur. In a sense, there will never be a replacement for the lost mother. It would be prone to utilize paranoid schizoid mechanisms of the defense because closeness is imagined to include mutual damage and destruction. It would turn away from life with an attitude of sour grapes, deprived from strong oral envy, or to detach and turn away in apathy. After protest came despair, and after despair came detachment. It would use depression as an attack. Since depression is a form of anger, it can be used skillfully to inspire guilt and control another, but at one's own experience in the end. It would fear her own destructiveness and feel intense blameworthiness. This last point might be what is meant when adoptees refer to feeling as if they were responsible for what happened to them. It might be connected not only to the loss of the mother, but to the loss of their own sense of goodness, their sense of self, or the ideal state of self. The summary. The integrity of the self is necessary to the healthy development of the ego, and it is its ability to relate to others. Any injury to the basic goodness of the self, or to what authors refer to as the ideal state of self, interferes with the timing and sequence of healthy ego development and the results in that which I call the primal wound. This wound, occurring before an infant has begun to separate its own identity from that of its mother, may result in a feeling that part of oneself has disappeared, leaving the infant with a feeling of incompleteness or lack of wholeness. That incompleteness described is often experienced not only in the genealogical sense of being cut off from one's roots, but in a felt sense of bodily incompleteness. For the child relinquished at the primal phase of development, when the mother not only plays the role of the child's self, but actually in the self we may be dealing with, not only with the self of the primary love object, but with the loss of the part of the self. At, with, at that, the primal stage, the child's inability to mourn the loss of the mother or of self, and their need to guard against further loss, may cause them to adopt a false self. If the false self takes the form of an acquiescent, compliant child, the child is seen as being well adjusted and not suffering any psychological pain. Others, however, in an attempt to demonstrate their pain and test the commitment of their parents, act out and may end up in psychiatric treatment, group homes, or jail. Neither is operating from the true self, but from a false self and from a profound sense of loss. So basically, what it is there's two. We create like a false sense of identity, right? And there's some of us who seem very well adjusted in our lives. We're good children. We do everything right in terms of how people see us. And then there's those that act out, right? And in both points, as adoptees, we're not actually who we truly are. We don't get to be ourselves because we put up such a wall. We create this like false sense of identity to basically appease or not appease at in the opposite side society. Like, we just don't get to be who we should have been or could have been.